And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense, and, of course, bring you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style, day in and day out. Thanks so much for joining us. Boy, do we have a great show today. I'm looking forward to checking in with Mike Brest of the Washington Examiner for Washington Examiner Wednesday. He's got a lot of stories this week. I don't even know how to sort through the focus areas, the key topics to discuss, but we'll figure it out. Lots to talk about politically and a variety of news stories that are, I think, very interesting. With breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner, Mike Brest, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We will also be joined by Ken Blackwell. He is former Secretary of State for the great state of Ohio. He is also involved on the board of an international elections organization. We're going to get his thoughts on what's going on when it comes to the election push by Democrats to have vote-by-mail only elections across the country and to ram it through pretty darn quickly. He wrote a piece for townhall.com recently about that, and we will talk with Ken Blackwell and get his insights and thoughts. Looking forward to that conversation. And finally, we'll be joined by Charlie Katebi, who is a health policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. This crisis is a wake-up call for telehealth, for cutting through the red tape and making it easier for people to consult with their physicians on medical issues that come up, different health issues that come up remotely. This is something we should be barnstorming forward with across the nation already. But now, the coronavirus crisis is even more of a wake-up call for exactly that. So, looking forward to talking with the Washington Examiner's Mike Brest, Ken Blackwell, and Americans for Prosperity's Charlie Katebi here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So lots of things we're going to be diving into today. But first, I want to begin by talking a little bit about the headline here, for example, from the Wall Street Journal, White House discussing phasing out coronavirus task force. Media reporting all around yesterday about the Trump administration looking to disband the task force structure. Now, what's interesting is the way in which the media has been presenting it, seemingly like it's Trump declaring mission accomplished, we're packing up, going home, and just simply moving on with the economy. He was asked by Jim Acosta about this policy move yesterday in a press conference, and here is what President Trump had to say.
We have many countries that we're helping, but the ventilator problem is solved, so you don't need that. We have now it's sort of a combination of safety and reopening. So we'll have something in a different form. But the task force for what we've done, I think everybody out there, when they're being very honest, I think the job we've done on testing will shortly be, and maybe even supersede, Doug, the job that we've done on ventilators, which people can't even believe. We had a call the other day with the governors. Mike Pence took the call, and they had, I believe, all 50 governors. And it was, they say, the best call we've had thus far. We're working closely with the governors. They have everything they need. And if they don't have it, and if they don't need it, or if they can't get it locally, then they know that we are stocked and we are ready. And we can have, as an example, we won't need this, but we were ready for weeks to have, we had 10,000 ventilators sitting in various locations with people by the ventilators ready to have those ventilators roll if they needed them in, as an example, Detroit or various other places over the country. So I think that as far as the task force, Mike Pence and the task force have done a great job, but we're now looking at a little bit of a different form, and that form is safety and opening, and we'll have a different group probably set up for that.
Are you saying mission accomplished?
No, not at all. The mission accomplished is when it's over. When it's over, Jim, mission accomplished. No, I wouldn't say that at all.
That is such an important point that the president raised there when asked by Jim Acosta. He just said, no, when it's over, mission accomplished. We're not there yet, mission accomplished. And exactly right, Trump should not be saying that. But here's the thing. The media seems to be presenting this perspective that President Trump is disbanding the task force because he no longer cares at all about the public health emergency that is coronavirus. If you watched his interview on ABC News with David Muir last night, which I thought Muir did a fine job. It was fair, good questions. I think the president was much more linear in his responses and his answers than I find him to normally be. He's not very much of a linear thinker. But that aside, President Trump has been clear-eyed in the need to address this crisis full on, the public health aspect being essential to that effort on the part of President Trump. And I think that's much to his credit. It's a necessary step for President Trump to take in terms of moving forward with reopening. But at the same time, he needs to keep his eye on the death count and on the crisis that people are facing from a public health emergency. And here's what he's doing about that. He's disbanding the task force in the next couple of months, it looks like, because he doesn't need the task force as it was structured. Now we're getting to a point where the curve is flattened in America, where the crisis is largely abated in terms of its magnitude. We still have a lot of concern going on and steps that need to be taken, especially as individuals, to stop the spread of this novel coronavirus, COVID-19. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that he needs this brain trust gathered together in the same way that he has. We're at a point now where he can begin transitioning back to individual departments. Federal Emergency Management Association. We can be looking at the Department of Health and Human Services taking on its own burdens. Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx will still be there. So the media can take a deep breath and not be too worried about the idea that President Trump is just packing up and going home and totally not caring about the public health emergency that we've been continuing to face, because he is. He's very in tune with that. His answer to Jim Acosta's question made that, I think, quite clear. Now, President Trump also has been emphasizing testing numbers. and what he's been doing and his administration has been doing to make sure that we are getting Americans tested. Leading the world in tests is what the United States of America has been doing. Let's go to cut 8. This is a snippet of the David Muir interview yesterday on ABC with President Trump, where he was talking a little bit about testing numbers.
Okay, let's talk about cases. You know why you're at 1 million cases? Because we have more testing than anybody else. If we tested as much as these countries down here, okay, who don't do very much testing at all, look at Japan, very little testing. They're at the bottom of the rung. Look at South Korea, gets so much publicity. The president of South Korea is a friend of mine. President Moon, he called up, he said, what you're doing with testing is amazing. If I tested this number of people instead of this number of people, I'd have far fewer. If I see this line goes all the way up, over 7 million tests. If I tested down here at 1 million tests, I would have a lot fewer cases too.
Now, given President Trump's graph, which we couldn't see what he was pointing to specifically, but you can imagine some of the comparisons. My guess would be Germany's on that chart, South Korea, which he was talking about on that chart. Now, you can't just make an apples-to-apples comparison in terms of numbers, sure. But what it does demonstrate is two things, actually. Number one, President Trump is still attuned to the public health situation and the need to address it. He recognizes the role that testing plays in bringing about the reopening. Hasn't gone away from that. Also, it does demonstrate that the United States has been extraordinarily successful, even though the media won't give him credit for it, extraordinarily successful in making sure that Americans are getting tests. 7 million plus tests already, and many more yet to come. Now, we may need to be stepping it up more, for sure, but that doesn't mean that you can belittle, especially in comparison even to other countries, not just apples-to-apples numbers comparisons, but percentages. We're seeing that the United States is doing its level best and doing a fine job in that regard. Now, finally, in Cut 7, Chuck Schumer was on MSNBC's Morning Joe yesterday, and he was asked about the reopening process, and here's a little bit of what he had to say.
My message is health has to come first, and if we're not extra careful about health, the economy will not improve. If that's another reason testing is so important. If people are afraid, you can give money to the store owners and say, open up. But if no one's going to go out on the streets and they don't have customers, what good is it going to be? So we have to be careful. You have to err on the side of science and of caution. That doesn't mean you shut down everything all the time. I think New York has issued a very careful plan. But when the president importunes 1,000 protesters, those fringe group, it seems, most of them, to go protest and say, open the government regardless of scientific information, that's going to hurt all of us.
Well, first of all, I think you meant open the economy, not so much open the government, but it's neither here nor there. The point is that what Chuck Schumer was suggesting is basically that President Trump, again, has his eye off the ball of making sure that the coronavirus spread is dealt with. That's not the case at all. Here's what President Trump is doing, what I have been advocating for, what the vast majority of those protesters and rally goers have been advocating for. Sensible policy solutions that recognize that the economy cannot remain shut down, that trusts the people to take public health into their own hands and to be responsible. Even Democrats who say we should persist in shutdowns make the argument, as Schumer did there, make the argument that businesses aren't going to want to open up automatically. Well, of course, that isn't necessarily going to be the case, but at least you give them the option. And if they don't want to yet, that's all well and good. At least it's not the government saying, no, you can't do this. It's businesses being able to make their own decisions whether or not to take the risks. And that's what running a business is all about anyway, is risk-taking. And they're going to be smart in how they handle it. The idea that we should just look to the government to persist in these shutdowns and not be doing a real effort to reopen is nonsensical. The idea that President Trump isn't striking a balance better and better is ridiculous as well. We need to be moving in that reopening direction, and Schumer is not being forthright, I believe. By the way, California is going to be starting to reopen. And that is very positive, especially since they were leading the country originally in these shutdowns. End of the week, they're beginning to lift restrictions on their lockdown. Every state now should be following suit. We can do it, and we must do it. $3 trillion in new debt. It was announced yesterday by the Treasury Department. $3 trillion in new national debt is what they will be seeking. We cannot continue to afford the national spending, but we also can't continue to afford the strain to the economy and society. It's time to get things rolling again. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're going to take a break. When we come back, our partners at the Washington Examiner will join us. Mike Brest, breaking news reporter, going to talk about several different topics. When we return, rocking and rolling here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us. F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hill Yeah Avenue and Dan Strait Street.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I have a very important issue that I'd like to discuss with you, the people of America, and the people of the United States as well. Traffic circles, traffic circles. These things are very communistic. Older people are terrified of traffic circles. I noticed this about 20 years ago when they came in. I said, this is no good. Our forefathers didn't fight in World War II to have traffic circles. They're very scary. It's, oh, let's all join hands and come into the circle like hippies. Wrong. You come to a four-way stop like a man and you take your territory, if you can handle it. If you can't, you get spit to the side and you're out. You lose. You're a loser. And that's what I wanted to make very clear at this time. Thank you very much for your attention. That's all. Going.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And Crossroad fans, let's get you back to your host, Mr. Sang Style, Jimmy Sengenberger.
And Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, working the Matoush magic once again. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and of course, doing our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. If you have not done so already, please be sure to subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. You can also like the page on Facebook, Jimmy Sengenberger, media personality, and of course, follow me on Twitter at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. And also be sure to follow our friends at the Washington Examiner. Washington Examiner content available, and of course, WashingtonExaminer.com, as well as on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And speaking of the Examiner, I don't even know where to start because there are so many stories this week that our first guest of the day, Mike Brest, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner, has that I want to be discussing. So we'll see where this goes, but there's so many things to dive into. Mike Brest, again, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner, joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Mike, welcome to the show. Good to have you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on. So I want to dive into a couple of stories that you have today at WashingtonExaminer.com. The first is, in the political dynamics, we have seen a lot of discussion about postponing primaries across the country and the possibility that that might happen. Well, one such primary, the Democratic primary in New York, was set to be postponed until a judge this week ruled that it could not be. Fill us in on what's going on there.
Absolutely. So we saw that last month, the Board of Election in New York decided that the election the primary should no longer happen out of fear of coronavirus. Sort of how would people safely go to the polls? However, that became a problem when a judge overturned that ruling last night. And so the judge overturned a ruling after Andrew Yang, one of the former presidential candidates, and a number of other people filed a lawsuit saying that by getting rid of the primary, it was preventing New Yorkers from enacting and going about their voting rights. And so the judge actually ruled in favor of Yang, and so the primary, which was supposed to be held on June 23rd, looks like it's back on. However, we're waiting to see sort of the fallout from the judge's ruling.
What was motivating Andrew Yang? What has he said publicly about this, Mike?
So a big part of his push into this, and as well as Bernie Sanders, who's also argued in favor of holding the primary, is that both of them are seeking to win delegates through the primary so that they can increase their power and their influence when it comes to the Democratic convention, which is supposed to be held this summer.
Yeah, I think it's so important to keep in mind that the primary process is not just something that can easily be swept away, and New York Democrats are clearly learning that lesson. Also, there has been a series called the 1619 Project that the New York Times was putting out several months ago, and it's just been getting a lot of controversial reactions, especially from conservatives, although now you have the head of the Pulitzer Prize defending the New York Times on this. Tell us a little bit about the back and forth between conservatives who are not so inclined to like this project for whatever reason, what the reason is, expand on that a little bit, and then what the Pulitzer chief is now saying.
So just to go back a little bit, the 1619 Project aimed to sort of re-examine and reevaluate the legacy of slavery in the United States. And it was timed accordingly so that it was released on the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first Africans in Virginia. And so this project sought to reevaluate slavery in a way that said the colonists in the United States, before it was called the United States, fought the Revolutionary War because they wanted to protect their right to own slaves. However, a number of historians have come out and said that that is not true, and the New York Times even went as far to add an editor's note saying that that part of the premise of their project is inaccurate. And so there's a lot of controversy now that they were awarded a Pulitzer Prize for commentary as to whether or not a piece that has some backlash into its credibility deserves such an award.
Yeah, one thing that has been so striking to me as I've observed the discussion, I haven't read too much of the 1619 Project. I haven't been especially interested in it, particularly because of the historical inaccuracies, but a lot of conservatives have been expressing frustration, saying that this is done more to be sort of critical of the United States and to perpetuate a narrative that Democrats and folks on the left have been putting forward on a regular basis about the way in which race has not just been handled in the past in America, but is being handled right now, and talking about the legacy of slavery and so forth.
Absolutely. So a number of conservatives have come out and expressed outrage over both the project in itself as well as sort of what this does for the Pulitzer Award when you give it to a story that has some factual inaccuracies or allegations of factual inaccuracies.
Mike Brest again is our guest from the Washington Examiner, breaking news reporter, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I want to shift to a couple of days ago, you were reporting on two different ads. And this is interesting, too, because these are very different ads, because one of them is from the Trump campaign, another is from an organization of ex-Republicans that is very critical, shall we say, to put it mildly, of President Trump. And so I want to talk about the controversies here and play those two ads. So first, let's go ahead with this ad that President Trump is calling deceptive. And this is cut 2. It's being put out by the Lincoln Project, as the organization is called, which is a very critical group of President Trump.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat.
Hysterical xenophobia.
That is the wrong clip, actually. So I'm sorry, it's cut 3 that we wanted to play there. My apologies, Nathan.
There's mourning in America. Today, more than 60,000 Americans have died from a deadly virus Donald Trump ignored. With the economy in shambles, more than 26 million Americans are out of work, the worst economy in decades. Trump bailed out Wall Street, but not Main Street. This afternoon, millions of Americans will apply for unemployment, and with their savings run out, many are giving up hope. Millions worry that a loved one won't survive COVID-19. There's mourning in America, and under the leadership of Donald Trump, our country is weaker and sicker and poorer. And now, Americans are asking, if we have another 4 years like this, will there even be an America?
Paid for by the Lincoln Project, which is responsible for the content of this advertising.
A very somber mood to that advertising and very harsh against the president. The president's campaign is trying to get that ad no longer to be played. Tell us what they're trying to do here and how they're going about it.
To backtrack a little, the Lincoln Project is made up of a group of never Trump conservatives who have all publicly denounced the president and have said they would support Vice President Joe Biden should he become the nominee, which everyone believes he will. That being said, they released this ad earlier this week, and it had gotten some popularity. However, the president then went on one of his late-night Twitter tirades, and he blasted everyone involved in the creation of the ad and did it in a personal way. And so the president, in a way, gave more air to this ad and made it much larger than it could have been. And it was at the president's own doing. And so the president has accused them of doing this ad in a scare tactic, and a number of conservatives have alleged that this ad has gone too far in painting too grim of a picture and being in an almost alarmist type of advertisement.
You know, I agree with the criticism of this advertisement, but I also think your point is very well taken, Mike Brest, and that is that when President Trump actually highlights an ad like this, and not only does he do so, but he does so with a 4-tweet thread, that really, blows some air onto the embers of a flame and gets it out there more pronounced. So what has been some of the reaction to this from other corners than just what President Trump has been saying on Twitter?
So we've seen, not only did President Trump address it on social media, but he was also asked about it when he was boarding Air Force One to head to Arizona yesterday. And he said that instead of calling themselves the Lincoln Project, they should call themselves the Loser Project. And so these types of attacks, which are name-calling and not necessarily attacks based on their criticisms of his job and what he's done politically, has again just brought more attention to the ad itself, which in essence is what the Lincoln Project wanted all along. And Rick Wilson, one of the main proponents and one of the leaders of the Lincoln Project, went on MSNBC last night and said that this was evidence that they had figured out a way to get under the president's skin, which says to me that this might not be the only ad we see from them in this vein. And so only time will tell how the president responds moving forward.
I would figure that's the case, that they're not going to let up on this. And Rick Wilson, I remember seeing him on CNN and MSNBC, a very harsh critic of President Trump, has been on the Never Trump bandwagon from the beginning. Let's go then to the cut two. And this is the ad that the Trump campaign is running, and CNN is demanding that the ad be taken down from the campaign, calling it misleading. Take a look at this one.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat.
Hysterical xenophobia.
Giving Americans a false sense.
Is it accurate that if these steps had not been put in place, it could have been 2 million people dead here in the United States?
Yes. No matter how hard they try to stop us, they can't. We built the greatest economy the world has ever seen, and we're going to do it again. Together, we're beating back the invisible enemy.
What the federal government did was a phenomenal accomplishment.
Through it all, the world has witnessed the unyielding resolve of our incredible American people.
Promise made, promise kept.
And I'm fighting for you, and I love doing it with everything that I have. And you know that. With the grace of God, we will win this war, and we will win this war quickly. And we will make America great again.
Theatrical style ad there, which is the approach that the Trump campaign seems to be taking in a lot of their campaign ads nowadays. And I found that to be pretty powerful in the sense of how he was using the imagery and some of the clips from the news media reports, as well as his speeches and what have you. But there's something about that ad that CNN calls deceptive and misleading. What do they say?
Exactly. And so there's a brief segment that we saw within that ad where you could see CNN's one of their anchors, Wolf Blitzer, talking to one of their chief medical correspondents, Sanjay Gupta, where in the clip you can only hear Wolf Blitzer sort of say, is it accurate that if these steps had not been taken, 2 million people would be dead? And in the clip you see Dr. Sanjay Gupta simply say yes. However, when you look at the transcript or watch the full clip from where that is taken from, you can see that it was not as the campaign took out parts of Blitzer's question as well as parts of Gupta's answer. And so the full question was, is it accurate that if these steps had not been put in place, such as the stay-at-home orders and the social distancing orders, 2 million people could be dead? And so the Trump campaign removed the phrasing or the acknowledgement of the social distancing guidelines as well as the stay-at-home orders, which made it appear in the ad, according to CNN, as if Dr. Sanjay Gupta was referring to the president's travel ban from China, which he decided to do in January. And so CNN is saying that it's misleading to suggest that Wolf Blitzer's question was specifically pertaining to that ban and not the social distancing guidelines and the stay-at-home orders, which he actually mentioned in that interview.
Mike Brest, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. This is interesting. It's an interesting controversy in the era of social media because we see videos from all sorts of different organizations and groups and campaigns that take a similar approach. Do you think that this is sort of the brave new world that we're in right now when it comes to campaigning, especially from videos online, or is this something that maybe is going to be a short-lived phenomenon? Because I don't think that this campaign ad from the Trump campaign is the only instance where anybody can level this sort of claim.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you in that. I think this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg for what we're going to see moving forward as campaigns continue to progress and as technology progresses. And so this isn't the first time that either the president or a media outlet accused of using a clip from network television in order to promote themselves. And so we're not really clear, and there isn't much guidance right now about sort of how flexible are these types of clips, and what exactly can you get away with, or what are you allowed to do? And so we know that social media platforms have rules specifically when it comes to both campaigns as well as when it comes to false advertising or fake fake statements. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's a way for social media to crack down on this, but also to do it uniformly or blanketly across the entire platform so that one party doesn't feel aggrieved.
Let's go to cut one finally here, Mike Brest from the Washington Examiner. It was an interesting moment this week when Joy Behar on The View reacted to a clip of Sean Hannity talking about militia, or at least people who were protesters in Michigan who came with long rifles and were open carrying and so forth. He had some strong criticisms for them, and Joy Behar found some rather intriguing agreement with Sean Hannity, the noted conservative Fox News host. Take a look at this.
So, Joy, things were
I don't blame you.
very weird, and you actually found yourself agreeing with this guy. Take a look.
No one is a bigger defender of the Second Amendment than yours truly. Everyone has the right to protest, protect themselves, and try to get the country open. This, with the militia look here and these long guns, no. Show of force is dangerous. That puts our police at risk. And by the way, your message will never be heard, whoever you people are. No one should be attempting to intimidate officials with a show of force. And God forbid something happens, then they're going to go after all of us law-abiding Second Amendment people.
Right. So, Joy, what do you make of this?
First of all, things are really bad when even Sean Hannity is out there telling these crazy people to stop it. Just stop it. I'd like to just reinforce and say thank you, Sonny,
I think
for what you just said.
that gets at the point where she was agreeing with Hannity, although the reasoning was a little different because Hannity was concerned, one, about safety, which I think they're both concerned, but Hannity was also concerned about the idea that if something were to go awry, that would throw some fuel into the fire of those who are advocating for more restrictions on the constitutionally protected right to keep and bear arms.
Absolutely. So what we saw was Sean Hannity expressing concern for law enforcement officials. We didn't see Joy Behar express similar concern for law enforcement officials in particular. However, she agreed with him in that it's not the best idea for people to be bringing long guns or rifles or anything of the sort to these stay-at-home protests, specifically where they were seen in Michigan. And so it's a very fascinating time whenever you can find two people so diametrically opposed as Joy Behar and Sean Hannity in agreement with one another.
Yeah, I thought it was quite something. Even Behar was recognizing that it was something. Mike Brest, breaking news reporter for our partners at the Washington Examiner. Great to check in with you today. Keep up the good work.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Again, Mike Brest with the Washington Examiner, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. When we return here on the program, we're going to be joined by Ken Blackwell. He is a former Secretary of State for the great state of Ohio. He's also on the board for an international elections organization and has some interesting insights on the push by Democrats to bring about a vote-by-mail scheme across the country for the 2020 elections, and has some admonitions about that. We will talk with Ken Blackwell when we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, once again coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Jimmy Sengenberger here, and I'm going to tell you something personal about myself. 8 years out of college, just about, I still have $16,000 in student loan debt, and I've had several forbearances along the way. But here's the thing. I don't think that you should have to forgive my student loan debt. In 1990, the year that I was born, student loan debt in the USA totaled $20 billion, with the average graduate coming out of school with $9,000 in debt. Now today, the total is $1.5 trillion across the country, with the average being $37,000 for a typical graduate. We've talked about the reasons why this 30 years of growth has happened in another video.
Are you worried about college tuition and how you're going to pay for it? Well, come on down to Bill of Goods where we've got the deal for you. Yes, you.
But while a lot of folks are talking about forgiving student loan debt, I think we've got to look at a couple of other ways to do this. First, in the 1970s, Congress essentially eliminated the ability for folks to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy. Yes, that means if you're about to default, you cannot discharge your student loan debt in bankruptcy because of something Congress did. Now, this got rid of all sorts of risks to the lender so they could keep churning out loans, but it also put people who were so deeply indebted in a position that they just couldn't get out of. We need to restore protection for student loan borrowers if you need to discharge in bankruptcy. But for average everyday borrowers, we want to make it easier to pay back the debt more quickly. For example, Senator Cory Gardner, Republican of Colorado, recently introduced the Student Loan Repayment Acceleration Act, a piece of legislation that would provide a quicker way to pay back your debt tax-free.
We have a big problem. Student loan debt is now about $1.5 trillion in the United States. For a person who's just out of college that's trying to start a family, maybe buy a home, simply pay the electricity bills, this kind of relief is going to be significant for them.
One of the things that this legislation would do is enable employers and employees to contribute up to $10,000 a year together to pay back student loan debt. This is a great way, tax-free, to get this process going much more quickly. You see, we don't need to just be looking at forgiveness of student loan debt as though that's the only way to address this. Through bankruptcy protection in Senator Gardner's bill, among other solutions, there really are better ways to do it, and we can persuade millennials to that effect.
And ladies and gentlemen, back on the set of Jimmy at the Crossroads is your host, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you. Jimmy at the Crossroads. Pleasure and a privilege to be with you as always. Bringing engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. My thanks to Mike Brest from our partners at the Washington Examiner, breaking news reporter there, for keeping us up to date on a variety of different stories going on this week. Coming up in the next segment, we will be joined by Charlie Katebi, who is a health policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity, and we're going to talk about unleashing more telehealth and telemedicine opportunities, how the coronavirus crisis we're dealing with right now underscores the need for this, but why it was a common sense thing we should have been expanding across the country even before the pandemic hit. But speaking of a crisis situation, the Democrats right now are looking at COVID-19 and this virus, and are looking ahead, especially to November 2020. And they're doing a big push for nationwide vote-by-mail scheme. That is, mail-in ballots across the country. There are only 5 states right now that essentially have statewide mail-in ballot systems. I'm in one of them, Colorado, the 3rd state to do this, which jumped in 2013. Washington was before that in 2011, and the first state to do this was in 1998, I believe, the state of Oregon. And 2000 was their first presidential election to do it. There's a reason why only 5 states have done this sort of thing so far. Democrats are doing what they can to expand it broadly. Let's talk about this with the former Secretary of State for the great state of Ohio, member of the board for the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, as well as the former mayor of Cincinnati and the former U.S. Ambassador to the UN Human Rights Commission, Ken Blackwell, joins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Sir, welcome to the program. It's good to have you. For some reason, I apologize, Mr. Blackwell. For some reason, I'm not hearing you at the moment here. We had a slight issue yesterday with this. Can you please talk one more time? I apologize. Are you hearing him, Nathan? Okay. Okay, so that's if you could just hold on one moment, throw up the logo, Nathan. We will take a very quick break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads and get this sorted out. Okay, call him and get an email, and we're going to send.
And now, folks, here is your host of the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
My friends, some days the unexpected happens, and that's sort of the nature of the era in which we live. Thank you for bearing with us, and my thanks are as well to our guest for sticking with us, Ken Blackwell, former Secretary of State for the great state of Ohio, and on the board of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, wanting to talk a little bit about what's going on with regards to mail balloting and the push from Democrats to make a nationwide mail ballot system for the 2020 elections. Ken Blackwell, welcome to the show. Can you hear me okay, sir?
Yes, I can, Jimmy. Good to be with you, sir.
And I can hear you. Thank you so much for bearing with us today. I really appreciate it. This is like sometimes things just go haywire and you got to move on the fly, you know?
Hey, brother, stuff happens, and you just got to go with the flow. Like
absolutely. Amen. All right. Well, it's so good to have you on the program. Thanks for coming on to share with us some of your insights. I really enjoyed your recent article for townhall.com where you talked a good bit about your thoughts on the mail-in ballot push from Democrats. Let's go 50,000-foot view from someone who is not only a former Secretary of State for a large state being Ohio, but also on the board of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. What's your view on this thing, 50,000 foot?
Last century. You go back to the 1918 elections, congressional elections nationwide. They took place right in the middle of the spread of the Spanish flu pandemic. Americans faced the challenge head on, and they engaged in elections. Constitutional republic are our elections that we hold across this country. So I now fast forward to now. We are on the verge of opening up, reopening American society, jump-starting our economy that was a strong economy, the strongest perhaps in human history, just as now it's time to jump-start it. We're facing some headwinds, but we're up to the challenge. Look, in 2014, the fledgling democracy of Liberia was facing the challenge of the spread of Ebola. They, following protocol, some best practices, making sure that the workers and the voters were as risk-free as possible, they conducted that election. What I'm saying, and what election officials across this country are saying, is that our system, its strength is in its diversity. Yeah, you have 5 states that do all mail-in voting, but you do have states who have a tradition of precinct-level in-person voting. We know from our experience that sort of scale and the bipartisan eyeballs that are on the system validate the legitimacy of the system, and we should be in a position as a great bounce back country. Our election in those states that have traditionally done that.
Ken Blackwell, I apologize again. you've been cutting in and out a little bit, so our Skype to phone connection's been a little bit problematic too. So I don't want to keep you too long, and I would love to reach out and reschedule for next week where we can get you on camera, make sure everything's working fine. Again, apologize for today's issues.
Oh, that's great.
But the essence of what you were saying is an issue of confidence and trust, faith that the election process is going to be done in a way that people can trust the results. Would you say that that's the case?
Out now. I've lost you.
All right. Well, Mr. Blackwell, I am so sorry for today's issues. We will get rescheduled if it's all right with you.
Okay.
And I look forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Again, Ken Blackwell, we'll make sure that this happens very soon here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Right. Thank you so much, sir. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. All the best.
Thank you. You as well. All right, folks, sometimes this is what happens in the technical age in which we live, where odd issues kick into gear and the smooth ship is not quite as smooth. So we're going to take a quick break. Let's get a video break queued up here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And when we come back, we'll try one more guest here. Charlie Katebi, who is with the Americans for Prosperity. He is a health policy analyst there. We're going to talk a little bit about telehealth and what's happening in that regard, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, what we're seeing, how things are looking, and what this crisis tells us about something we should already be doing, which is telehealth. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads. Stay tuned.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We all have rules we have to follow. But what if you could have a direct hand in helping to write the rules that would impact your life or your business? I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Let's talk about exactly that. There's a lot of talk these days about the Trump administration's efforts to deregulate the American economy. If you think about it, though, deregulation is actually a great thing because it unleashes the unlimited potential of each and every individual. But in a lot of cases, you actually find folks advocating for more regulation, and frequently those people are the ones who will benefit most from the regulation. Such as big businesses like Facebook or General Motors that, if you put in more regulation, would be able to cut out the competition or directly benefit them. For example, putting up higher barriers to entry so that next small business, the next Mark Zuckerberg, won't really be able to get in on some of the action, some of the incredible opportunities. For example, last year we had the data privacy scandals for Facebook. Well, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, went before Congress and testified before a Senate committee.
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or not.
But you as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then yes.
You think the Europeans have it right? So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you submit to us some proposed regulations?
Yes, and I'll have my team follow up with you so that way we can have this discussion across the different categories where I think that this discussion needs to happen.
Look forward to it.
Now, what did you notice in this video? You had CEO Mark Zuckerberg say that he supports the right regulation, and a United States senator actually asked him to provide some sample regulations to potentially help write the regulations. Big businesses tend to support more regulation because it hurts their upstart competitors, say the next Mark Zuckerberg. That's why General Motors CEO Mary Barra has been advocating for a brand new effort to regulate in advance of the interests of battery-powered cars, which makes perfect sense because Mary Barra has actually begun moving forward with GM toward an electric-only future. So what you have here are big businesses having seats at the table day in and day out to help increase regulations to the disadvantage of smaller competitors. That's a case for less regulation, not more. And it's a message we can get across to millennials today, who are the most innovative generation, perhaps in history. That is a message we need to get across as well. So let's boldly proclaim it.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. In today's episode, the captain is making travel plans.
Sparks, open up a frequency to price expediosity line.
Yes, Captain.
Hello, and welcome to Price Expediosity Line. How can I help you?
Well, I'll need a room.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Oh, that's a shame. Never found the right woman, huh?
Well, there was this... No, wait, just book me a bed.
King, queen, full, twin, Murphy.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. In today's episode, the captain is making travel plans.
Sparks, open up a frequency to price expediosity line.
Yes, Captain.
Hello, and welcome to Price Expediosity Line. How can I help you?
Well, I'll need a room.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Oh, that's a shame. Never found the right woman, huh?
Well, there was this... No, wait, just book me a bed.
King, queen, full, twin, Murphy, or bunk.
King. You never know.
Well, as long as you're convinced. All right, name your price.
Name my price?
That's how it works. Name your price.
$6?
$6 it is. Let's plug it in here. Bippity boppity boo. And sorry, you are outbid.
By how much?
Penny. Someone bid 6. Oh, 1.
Who?
Oh boy, I just booked a room for $6.01.
Well, will the captain ever make a good bet bid? Tune in next time when we hear...
Here's one for $602.
I'll take it.
$1,000.
No! Damn dramatic pauses.
On Starship Winkler.
Do you wear a toupee? Do you yell out, Spark? Do you put in pauses when you talk? Do you start real soft and then go real loud? Have you won 2 Emmys? Do you love a crowd?
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner. Yeah, you got lots of macho and swagger. You had alien affairs. You sing bad but no one cares. You find low airline fares. If you like to work, got a handsome smirk. If you're Captain Kirk, whatever makes you feel like a
Me. Phasers on. Stunning. Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, the intersection of politics, economics, and technical challenges that oftentimes seem to crop up in the era of the internet that we are all a part of now. So great to be with you here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And we're not sure some of what's happening in the sense that occasionally it has been a little while since this happened, but we have an issue where everything is just kind of not working as it is supposed to. We are working diligently here to get Charlie Katebi on, who is a health policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. And I think what Nathan is describing to me is a circumstance where that link is not working. I'm not sure why that is not quite working. So we're still working at trying to get this rolling here. So we do apologize for all these issues that have been happening today. Occasionally, that apparently takes place when you're working with technology, and it is just not functional as we would like to see. But I do want to just say a word here about telehealth. I mean, we have been in a situation here with telehealth where people are now waking up to the benefits when you're at home, when you're stuck at home, when you have no choice but to be at home, when you are forced by government to be at home, and you're concerned about virus spread and getting introduced to virus at a healthcare facility and so forth. You know, you need to find some way to get medical help. And to do so in a way that can actually work functionally and that doesn't take much strain, not too much of a challenge, so on and so forth. So telehealth, where you can use online technologies, is a great way to go about this. Many states have been expanding use of telehealth services and have had tremendous success with doing so. However, far too many states have significant restrictions on the ability to have telemedicine used in providing medical care for a variety of different reasons. So that is the issue that we've been wanting to have a conversation with Charlie Katebi about, but unfortunately, it looks like we're having these issues persisting. So here's what we are going to do, my friends. We're going to end our show right now, and we are going to see about at least conducting our interview with Charlie Katebi live here in just a few moments. I have some thoughts on how we might be able to address this, so keep it right. On YouTube. Hey, no, it looks like we've actually got, it's a miracle. Miracles sometimes happen. We've got visual on Charlie Katebi. So let's do an introduction here. Charlie Katebi is a health policy analyst, and hopefully we'll be able to hear him here. Charlie Katebi is a health policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. He has done work with my Millennial Policy Center, which I have headed up for the last few years as well, in the healthcare issues. So I got to know just how much Charlie Katebi really understands about healthcare policy and different things that we can do to open it up, reduce costs, but boost access to care. Charlie Katebi joins us now. Charlie, hello and welcome, my friend.
Hey, man. Hey, Jimmy. It is great to be here. How you doing?
I'm doing better now that I can actually hear you. Good to have you on the program, my friend. How are you? How are things in the Washington, D.C. area?
I mean, I hear that the shutdown is going to continue at least for another couple months, so we've seen better days.
Well, I'm here in Colorado, where at least we have some openings taking place, and I'm glad to see that. I think the governor in Virginia and the leaders in D.C. and whatnot are not quite up to par with what we should be doing, but that's neither here nor there. Charlie, I wanted to talk with you about telehealth because I know you've done a lot of work for AFP in this area. And let's just get right to the basics before we even get to what the coronavirus tells us about the need for telemedicine and also about some of the arguments for it. What in the world is telemedicine? Give us a little bit of a primer on that.
Telemedicine is sort of just what we're doing right now. It's information technology that allows patients and providers to interact with each other remotely. And this is incredibly beneficial for patients who are in rural areas, underserved areas that really don't have reliable access to a physical doctor's office. So it makes it a lot easier for patients to really consult the doctor for basic primary things like primary care, but also allows them to check up with things that may be a little bit more serious as well. So it really helps across the healthcare spectrum. And this can refer to a number of different things, like I mentioned. This can refer to real-time consultations, like what we're doing now, but it can also allow providers to remotely monitor patients' health conditions from a distance as well. So there's a lot of variety to these new technologies, and it's really exciting to see all these opportunities open up.
Do you think the technology is there for widespread use of telemedicine, Charlie Katebi?
It is, actually. And it's actually more and more of the technology is becoming available with advances. And we're really starting to even see it go into help with specialty work as well. So I mentioned Skype conversations like what we're doing right now. Oftentimes, it's not just between a patient and a provider. Sometimes it's between two different providers. So let's say you're a hospital in a rural area that don't have a lot of stroke specialists, and all of a sudden a patient comes in that's suffering from a stroke into the emergency room, and you don't have a stroke specialist. What this technology allows the physicians in the emergency room to do is to actually Skype in, call in a stroke specialist from another part of the state or even another part of the country. And that stroke specialist can now advise those physicians in that hospital to deal with this very complex problem. So it's really exciting to see this technology really go beyond just basic primary care.
So, Charlie Katebi, when we look at the states across the country and how they are approaching telehealth, I mean, this is a technology that's finally, as you're describing, it's finally there. But they've made strides where this has been something that we could see implemented on a wider scale for the past several years. But we've seen it very slowly taken up by states. I'm here in Colorado, where we've had some really good use, I think, overall in terms of telemedicine, still a ways to go. And across the country, there are a lot of states where it's not something that you can easily do. What are we noticing as far as the current environment from a legal standpoint and anything that would require policy changes?
Oh, yeah. So at the state level, a major barrier is that oftentimes a lot of medical licensing boards, they don't like the idea of out-of-state healthcare practitioners coming in and delivering healthcare remotely through telehealth to patients in their state. A lot of times there's a turf war between providers from different states, but the fact is that providers that are licensed in one state oftentimes receive the exact same level of training and the exact same level of certification as other states. But the fact is that they don't like the idea of providers that haven't paid their licensing dues to be delivering care, even though the level of care is exactly the same and it's high quality. That's at the state level. And at the federal level, Medicare, which is a major payer and provider of healthcare in this country, simply imposes just these enormous blanket bans in a number of cases that prevent Medicare enrollees who are often older and sicker from receiving a lot of essential healthcare services.
Charlie Katebi, again, health policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. So when it comes to telehealth, I mean, clearly there is a need for this during the current pandemic because people have to be at home and they want to limit their exposure to a medical situation, say at a doctor's office or at the hospital or an ER, whenever they can because they don't want to run the risk of getting infected by this virus. However, this isn't the only circumstance where telemedicine can be incredibly useful. I mean, in states across the country where you have more rural areas, especially, or where you have mountainous parts of the state, it's more difficult for people to get to a medical provider, and this can provide a tremendous opportunity for them to be able to access care remotely.
You're absolutely right. And it's not just rural areas that can benefit. There are a lot of inner cities that just for a number of socio and economic reasons just don't have a lot of doctors' offices as well who would benefit. The problem is that Medicare actually forbids patients who live in a metropolitan area actually from using telehealth services. That's one major rule that's a big problem. And another rule which imposes a huge barrier is that they have a very specific and limited list of what type of facilities and areas can a patient access telehealth through the Medicare system. And a big problem is that a very important location, the patient's home, is actually prohibited as a setting for patients to receive telehealth. So the place where patients would mostly benefit, especially during this current crisis, because right now we're all trying to practice social distancing, the Medicare program during most instances before this crisis actually prohibited patients from receiving telehealth in their home. And it's really thankful, and it's just really positive to see that the administration is starting to remove these barriers.
Now, is this something that then, because you're talking about Medicare, Medicaid's also a federal program, although that's administered by the states, that really requires much more and broader federal action, or to what extent is there a federal role versus a state role, Charlie Katebi, in helping to expand these services?
There's going to be a bit of both. So right now, the administration has waived a broad swath of restrictions on telehealth in both the Medicare and Medicaid system. But the problem is that a lot of these barriers have been lifted only during this current emergency. So after the federal government deems that this emergency is no longer here, these barriers are going to return. The big problem is that we're probably going to see a lot of the really terrible health conditions that we're seeing with coronavirus linger for a long time. A lot of the patients that have been going into hospitals and emergency room for coronavirus, we're now seeing that they're actually encountering a lot of longer term healthcare conditions as a result of this virus. So we're going to see a lot of patients need a lot more healthcare over the long term. And we're going to need our laws to step up to the plate and really allow providers to deliver more healthcare through telehealth.
Well, the thing that's so striking to me, Charlie, is that clearly we're dealing with this pandemic, and that underscores the reason why people need to be able to access these services. But on a regular day-to-day basis, under a everyday or typical circumstance where we're not worried about a pandemic, people should be able to choose how they want to access care. If the technology's there, there really is no justifiable reason to make somebody leave their home in order to get medical assistance. I mean, especially, for example, if you're elderly. We may get through this pandemic this year. God willing, we will be past it, and it won't be something we're worried about in 2021. But there will probably be a lot of elderly people who will want to stay home and not go out and risk it for quite some time. And they should be able to, even without a pandemic or any concerns like that, I think. It's a freedom issue, too.
I agree completely. The problem is that even with this, during this emergency, and we're seeing a whole host of doctors and nurses and hospitals step up to the plate and deliver more telehealth to Medicare patients. The problem is that a lot of experts in Washington consider telehealth to be extremely expensive if the taxpayer starts to be provided on an ongoing basis. So the main office in Washington, D.C. that measures the cost of bills, that's a congressional budget office. They have this idea that if you make telehealth more available, that cost will just skyrocket in the Medicare program. And as a result of this mistaken view about telehealth, we have all these rules in place that make it incredibly hard for patients to access it. So that is the primary problem. We need to get out of this idea that telehealth is going to raise costs for taxpayers, when the fact is that when people can more readily and more easily access primary care, they have a lot less need to go to the emergency room. So it's going to be the job of lawmakers and the Trump administration to really make sure that we do not let this mistaken idea get in the way of good policy.
It seems to me also, Charlie Katebi, again, our guest from Americans for Prosperity, health policy analyst there, it seems to me that if we did allow for more telemedicine through a program, for example, like Medicare, and opened up to people getting access to care from practitioners across state lines, anywhere around the country, that would also help to keep costs down, because then you have more doctors in the pool. There may be some states that have more latitude from a doctor because there's not as much of a population in a particular area where that doctor is practicing. But a more heavily populated area in another state may benefit, therefore, from that doctor potentially being able to shift to some more online services for out-of-state patients.
You're right. That particular reform to allow providers to practice telehealth across state lines, that would do enormous good to have that change be implemented permanently. And I think during this current crisis, we're going to see a lot of positive benefits that we can tout after this crisis. So another one of the major changes that the Trump administration has implemented is they're telling providers, if you have a license, if you have a quality healthcare license from another state, you can deliver telehealth or any kind of healthcare actually across state lines. You do not have to be in the state where your patient is located. So this is going to be incredibly helpful for allowing providers who are in states that haven't been hit very hard by the coronavirus to deliver telehealth services in states like New York and New Jersey that have really just been slammed by this virus. And like I mentioned before, there's going to be a lot of long-term health consequences as a result of this crisis. And it's going to be incredibly important that we give providers the real, true legal flexibility to serve those patients well.
And Charlie, one thing that comes to my mind as well as a question is, okay, we're talking a lot about Medicare here and what the federal government needs to do to get rid of Medicare impediments, but also the idea of practicing across state lines, physicians, which also kicks into the question about occupational licensing of physicians in one state and being accepted in another state. But what does the private sector need to see happen in order for private doctors who are being paid through insurance companies or self-pay in order to expand use of telehealth services across the country?
That's going to be a state-by-state issue. Each state has their own different laws regarding who can practice in that state, whether it's a doctor or a nurse through telehealth, and whether out-of-state nurses and doctors can practice. And it's incredibly positive to see a lot of states during this crisis have really stepped up to the plate and said, you know what, we recognize that out-of-state doctors really have a strong role to play in dealing with this crisis when we need all the help we can get. So especially in Colorado, what Governor Paulus did is he issued an executive order that said, if you have a license and it's in good standing from another state, you can immediately come to this state and start practicing. And this is exactly what we need all across the country. Even if the Trump administration implements long-term permanent reforms to allow Medicare and Medicaid to reimburse providers, we're going to still need states and governors to really step up to the plate and allow all licensed providers to practice across state lines. And this will allow patients who have private individual insurance or employer-based insurance to really enjoy these benefits as well.
And how about nurse practitioners, for example? I mean, tell us a little bit about nurse practitioners. My view is that they could be an opportunity as well, including if they have their own clinics that are independent of a doctor's office, where they're able to provide telehealth services as well. Because the biggest issue that we're seeing across the country in terms of being able to get care is to access care. And that is a crisis. I mean, we've been mentioning Colorado a few different times. Here in Colorado, we've got over 1 million Coloradans who are without the ability to easily access physicians. And that is a crisis that we need to address. So how about sort of allowing nurse practitioners to go ahead and do telehealth services?
Oh, of course. Yes. Nurse practitioners, nurse specialists, nurse anesthetists, all of these high quality advanced nurses need to be part of this conversation as well. They are capable they are just as capable as physicians to deliver a range of important healthcare services. And it's important that we also give them the tools to deliver telehealth in a legally flexible way. A big problem right now is that a lot of physicians are retiring. And unfortunately, a lot of physician practices are closing right now because of the coronavirus. And there's a real fear among the medical community that these practices aren't going to be opening up after the crisis just because so many physicians are close to retirement. So it's going to be incredibly important that states remove a lot of regulatory barriers on nurses so that they can also deliver primary care and specialty care services so that patients who live in states or rely on doctors don't lose access to healthcare services when their doctor retires.
Yeah, I think it's so profoundly important to keep in mind that because doctors' offices have been forced to close down, at least temporarily, many of them will not come back. And so we already have a crisis of access in state after state after state, and we need to find ways, and actually we found the ways, so we really need to execute on those ways and make them happen, to start implementing these kinds of reforms so that you can help people access the care that they need during and after this crisis. And I just have to say that we are now learning the benefits of things that you and I have been arguing about for some time now, or in favor of, in terms of telehealth services, in terms of unleashing nurse practitioners, in terms of just providing choice for patients in terms of the care that they want to go for.
You're absolutely right. Our healthcare laws should absolutely ensure that patients receive high quality healthcare. But lawmakers should also know that any law that stands between a patient in need and a high quality healthcare provider, any law that imposes a barrier or a blockage on that is directly harming that patient. And that applies to barriers on telehealth, and that also applies to barriers that restrict the ability of nurses to independently deliver healthcare. And I think after this crisis is over, we're going to have a very long discussion to look at the research and see which barriers and which reforms were actually imposing the biggest impacts on patients. If states are imposing these enormous barriers and they were suffering, we need to make sure that those laws do not remain in place. And if we saw that a lot of states have removed those barriers and allowed more doctors and nurses to deliver health care, and we saw the real true healthcare benefits accrue to patients, then we need to have a long-term conversation about making sure that those reforms are permanent and patients can continue to receive that high-quality healthcare.
Two final questions for you, Charlie Katebi, again, our guest from Americans for Prosperity, health policy analyst there. When it comes to the lessons learned here, one of the ones that I think is just so significant, we see this as states across the country and the federal government are cutting away red tape temporarily, is just the value of answering the question, well, okay, if in a crisis situation there is value in cutting up red tape that is strangling practitioners and making it more difficult for patients to access care, why not make that permanent? Why is it just during a crisis that we do this? I think that the lesson is, if it works during a crisis, it's probably going to work day to day.
100%. Right now, patients are in the need for more health care than ever before. And if we believe that telehealth was delivering unsafe care, or nurse practitioners were delivering unsafe care before this crisis, then it would be crazy for states to start implementing these reforms to allow easier access to both.
Right.
But the thing is that states have realized during this crisis that they need all healthcare providers, all the high quality ones, to have as much flexibility as possible to deliver healthcare in a patient's home or in a hospital or anywhere where they need it. So this just goes to show that there is a broad realization that these are high quality healthcare providers, and our laws should make sure that they are not standing in the way of making sure that these providers can really serve patients in need.
And final question, here's a broad one. Is there anything we've missed in our discussion? Or if not, if we've covered the main basis points, is there anything you want to re-emphasize before we cut you loose, Charlie Katebi?
I would say just for states, just for your listeners, if you live in a state that has removed these barriers on nurse practitioners, removed barriers on telehealth, talk to your congressional representative and talk to your state representative, and really ask them if these changes have been so beneficial during this emergency, why not make them permanent? And maybe talk to your representatives and tell them the stories about your relatives who have been possibly harmed by this virus and how they were incredibly helped by providers who had a lot more flexibility to really serve their loved ones. I would say talk to them about that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Charlie Katebi, health policy analyst at Americans for Prosperity. Great work on this. Thanks for filling us in on the advent of telemedicine. Charlie Katebi once again joining us from the Americans for Prosperity here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thank you, my friend. Well, that is it for us today. Thanks for powering through everything that we have been dealing with in terms of some of the technical issues and more. We'll be back tomorrow, get everything sorted out with another engaging, intelligent talk edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Such a pleasure and a privilege, as always, to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Nathan Matoush, our producer extraordinaire, for his work on the Matoush Magic. And, of course, the Washington Examiner, Charlie Katebi, Ken Blackwell, who we will be bringing back on very soon, and Mike Brest from the Washington Examiner. Have a great rest of the day. Stay well, be healthy, and may God bless America.